Let's talk about measurements and understanding the importance of knowing measurements. Sometimes I get a little shocked at how many people don't understand the basic of measurements. And maybe it shocks me only because of the fact that, as I said earlier, I'm not a mathematician. Um, Basic math, not such a big deal. But when you start getting into like algebra and stuff, I mean, I should have failed algebra 2. The teacher was he was gracious to me and gave me a D minus in high school, so I didn't have to take it again. But when I took but that meant I had to take consumer math in my senior year because they want to make sure if you don't do great in algebra, they want to make sure you at least have the basics to get by. And I loved that class and had no problem with it. And so I guess is because I know that I'm not this amazing mathematician, but I understand the basics of measurements when it comes to cooking and baking and measuring things, measuring fabric. Well, I had a local, I might have told this story before, but I know the other part of the issue, one of the issues that's going on is that basic math is no longer really being taught in school, like being able to grasp basic math concepts. Whereas the focus is on trying to get high test scores on this other stuff that isn't near as important as the basic math. And so what you have is you have a generation, maybe a few generations of people that they don't understand simple concepts like, and if I have anybody from countries that use the metric system, forgive me because I'm going to be talking about American standard measurements. But you have a lot of people that, even people that sew, that don't understand there's 3 feet in a yard. So when they go to get fabric, they might think in yards, but they don't know how many feet is in that yard. They don't understand how many quarts are in a gallon. And so when I give directions on, okay, so I'm making a half gallon of vinegar. And so I say, okay, I put this X amount of sugar, X amount of water, blah, 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 whatever it is. Okay. And so it's often surprises me how many people are like, well, how much sugar do I add if I'm making a whole gallon? Well, if you understand that a half gallon is half of a gallon and there's 2 halves in a whole, it simply means you double it. And then on the other hand, I'll have somebody say, well, how much sugar do I put in if it's a quart? Well, you got to understand there's 4 quarts in a gallon. That means there's 2 quarts in a half gallon. That means if you're making a quart instead of a half gallon, you just half it. So, and that's that kind of example. Okay. I mean, you might be surprised how many people ask me these questions. I'm always kind of blown away. And it's not because they're stupid. It's because they simply haven't been taught these things. And, but I've heard like man on the street type interviews where like somebody's asked, like, what's a quarter of an hour? If you word it that way, people are we're talking college students, 25 minutes. No, a quarter of an hour is 15 minutes. Quarter just means it's 1/4. So that tends to throw people off. Now, let me give you some very, very basic things. See, if you can't get the basic, you don't have much, right? So, some of this I had to learn when I was out on my own and I was really getting serious about baking, and especially when I started cooking for just me and Patrick. And I was like, okay, so how do I take this recipe and make it so it's a much smaller, maybe 1/3, 1/2. And so I started learning things like how many teaspoons are in a tablespoon. Well, there's 3 teaspoons in a tablespoon. And then you work your way up from there. How many tablespoons are in a quarter of a cup? 4. 4 tablespoons equal a quarter of a cup. So it means 1/8 of a cup is going to have 2 tablespoons. And then how many quarter cups are in a cup? 4. How many half cups? 2. Work your way up. How many cups are in a pint? 2. 2 cups in a pint. How many pints are in a quart? 2. 2 pints in a quart. How many quarts are in a half gallon? 2. How many quarts are in a whole gallon? 4. Once you understand a lot of these basics, it'll make your kitchen, whatever it is you're doing, so much easier, especially when you're trying to tailor certain recipes to either make more of them or less of them. Maybe you don't want to double a recipe, but you want a little bit more. You want to do it 1.5, so 1.5. You want to make it 1.5 times bigger. So you're going to take that recipe, plus you're going to add another half. So when you can understand, even fractions, this is one thing I do remember about the basics in school, was being taught that, you're thinking, man, fractions are kind of, dividing and multiplying fractions. When I first started trying to deal with it, it seemed so difficult. But then when the teacher was explaining, well, the reason you need to know how to do this, it doesn't matter what you do in life. Even if you are a stay-at-home housewife and you're doing all the cooking, you're going to need to know how to multiply or divide the fractions when it comes to making cookies or a cake or whatever it is. And that when I understood just that point alone, I'm like, that makes sense. And then when I started putting it into practice, it became so much easier for me to remember those concepts that were just so frustrating in school. And the same thing happened when I started crocheting and working in rounds, where you're doing amigurumi and you keep increasing it around. I never had my multiples memorized until I started crocheting and started working those kind of things and working in the rounds and having to increase it by so much each round. And then I could create my own patterns once I did that, because then it was like suddenly multiples were so easy to remember at that point. I mean, all through school, I could not, sure, I could count by 2s and 5s and 10s, but 9s, 8s, 7s, 6s even, that was hard. I couldn't remember that, but now it's easy. It's really easy because it's applicable to what I do. And so that makes it easy. And so if math is not your thing, just remember that once you have something you can apply it to, trust me, it will get easier. You just have to start doing it. But once you're applying it, you're like, okay, I remember that. That's easy. That's easy to do. And it is just a really important thing. And then you'll find that knowing those basics is going to help you with other things that you might not have thought of before. But especially if we're talking about, the weights and the measures and all that. What I can say about the metric system is it was the 70s, I believe, that they were trying to introduce the metric system and actually, into the States and teach it to school kids and have it be, I don't know if they were trying to change us to the metric system. I don't remember, but I remember they were trying to teach it to us. And a lot of us were having a hard time fully grasping that, while still trying to understand our own, what we were already using. And it seems like they just gave up, which I think is kind of a shame, because the metric system is so much more widely used. And I wish I remember it better. But what I do know is that a liter is just like an ounce bigger than a quart. So that means there's just a little more than 4 liters in a gallon. So if you had 4 liters, you're going to have a little bit better than a gallon. So I do know that. But so yeah, if you're on the metric system, the same is going to go, understand how many liters or, you need and how many milliliters and all that. But again, I'm not on the metric system. I just wish they would have pushed it a little bit more when I was in school and kind of forced us to learn it better. If nothing else, for the sake of, I think a person can actually have both in their head and work with both of them. I'm not good at remembering all that. I'm really terrible because I'm so used to working in the American standard. You know, tablespoons, cups, half cups, quarter cups, ounces, pounds, and that sort of thing. If you don't know the basic measurements, print off a copy and tape it to the inside of the door of your cabinet. There you go. And see, that's what's really great too about if you're having to learn this stuff. Let's say you are a homeschooling grandparent or parent, where you can learn right along with your kids, or your kids are learning as you're learning. This is one of the really great benefits of homeschooling, besides all the many other great benefits of homeschooling, is that were certain topics that I learned so much more about that I never learned in school, either because it wasn't taught well or because I was a dreamer. I was the one that would be looking out the window. What? What? Don't call on me. Don't call on me. If it was even taught, it was just so boring the way it was presented. I needed to be doing, I needed hands-on stuff. So teaching my kids about things like history and all the things that were boring in school, well, history is important. See, I felt like they didn't teach us enough the importance of learning history. You just felt like, why should I care about a bunch of dead guys, right? You should care a lot about history and learning, because if we don't remember history, we're going to repeat it. And it's not going to be the good stuff. It's going to be the bad stuff that we repeat because we forgot. And so these things are important. And so you can learn these things right along with your kids. And as you're learning them, and especially as they see your own excitement, as you start wrapping your brain around something that you never got when you were a kid, or suddenly you realize the importance of something, your kids are going to see that excitement, or your grandkids are going to see that excitement, and it's going to make them more apt to want to learn and grow and hang on to that information that you're teaching them. I feel like I should do another homeschool related video, even though I'm so separated from it in some ways. I do have grandbabies that we're kind of starting to work with them, but it's kind of interesting because I'm so busy doing video stuff a lot of the times, or other such things, or in the kitchen cooking when they're here, that a lot of times it's Patrick that's doing a lot of the one-on-one stuff, reading books to them and trying to teach them words, teach them how to see the words, teaching them how to write. So it's pretty cool, because obviously when he was out, he was working all the time. And so I was the one teaching the kids mostly.